You know, if you've never ridden a motorcycle and you only ride in a car or a truck, you may see bikers do things on the roads and you're like, why are they doing that? And that's what we're going to talk about today as I give you 7 more things that only bikers will understand. Now, I've done 2 previous videos to this one, so if there's things that I've missed here in this one, it may be in one of those other 2. And of course, I want to hear from bikers out there after the video. What are some things that you do or traditions that you have as a motorcyclist that only we would understand? And maybe I'll use those in a part 4 to this series that I'm doing. No matter where you fall, hopefully I can give you some good information and tell you why we do the things we do on the road. Let's go and get into it. First thing I want to talk about is the Gremlin Bells or Spirit Bells, because this is one of the most important things that specifically Harley riders or Indian riders or cruiser riders do, but there is a really important purpose to this. Now, this started back in World War II, and British and US pilots noticed that before they would have a malfunction or a crash or something went wrong, they would see these, little gremlins or creatures on their plane. And so they started hanging bells to actually, ward off these evil little spirits. And it actually started way before that with church bells, and plagues and stuff. They would actually ring those bells to get rid of any evil spirits out there. And the same principle applies today. So after World War II, a lot of guys started riding motorcycles because there was 100,000 of them made from Harley and Indian during the war. And so, GIs would buy those old bikes and then they would take those bells and hang them on their motorcycles to keep the gremlins away. Now, if you've ever noticed potholes in the road, you may think, oh, that's just a soft spot in the asphalt or traffic or whatever. No, it's actually these gremlins that fall off of motorcycles because they have the bell installed. And essentially these gremlins, they're looking for the lowest point on the motorcycle. So they hang out on the side of the road, they grab onto a bike. If you have a bell, they will actually get trapped in the bell. They can't stand the ringing, they fall off, they create a pothole. If you don't have a bell, that's where malfunctions will happen. You'll get a dead battery. Even worse, you might crash. And so these Gremlin bells are super important to Harley and Indian riders specifically. There's some rules around it now. You can't buy your own bell, and you're really not even supposed to install your own bell. It's got to be a gift from somebody, and then they have to install it. And it also really needs to be on the lowest part of the bike because that's where these gremlins attach themselves to. Either way, you see that little bell on the bottom of the motorcycle, now you know, first of all, where potholes come from, and you know we're trying to ward off those evil little gremlins. And that's going to lead us perfectly into the reason we would spend $30,000 or $40,000 on a motorcycle. Now, you may be thinking from the outside looking in, if you don't know anything about them, like, why would you pay $30,000 for something that has 2 wheels, a motor, and no protection on it? Or why would you buy a Harley Davidson when you can get a really fast motorcycle for that amount of money? And it really comes down to just a couple of things. First of all, tradition. To me, it's cool knowing that my grandfather, he rode motorcycles and they were Harley Davidsons, and guys from World War II, they rode motorcycles and they were Harley Davidsons or Indians. And so it's really cool to kind of follow in that tradition and follow in their footsteps, riding the same exact roads. But it really comes down to risk and reward. So tradition is a big part of it, but risk versus reward. There is really no comparison here because the reward is outweighs the risk 100%. You feel the open wind passing through your helmet, or whatever, if you don't wear a helmet at all, whatever, when you feel that open wind and you're riding with buddies and you're going on a long road trip or whatever, it is one of the best feelings out there. And so you may see it as somebody that doesn't know any better, like $30,000-$40,000 machine, and you don't get anything with it, and I get all these creature comforts and blah blah blah. It has nothing to do with that. There's things we do to make our motorcycles more comfortable, don't get me wrong, and we spend a lot of money into it. Actually, that's something I'll talk about here in a minute. But the biggest thing is tradition and that risk reward, because the reward is actually so great on a motorcycle. It outweighs any kind of risk we take. And if you've never been in the wind on a motorcycle, it's really hard to understand why we would invest so much money into a machine with only 2 wheels, a motor, seat, and handlebars. That's going to lead me into my next thing really well, actually, and that is you will not save money by buying a motorcycle. Now you may think, well, the upfront cost is cheaper, and when I say cheaper, it's going to be cheaper than buying a brand new truck. Of course, depending upon the truck you get, and I mean, depending upon the car or SUV you get. Cars and SUVs, 50, 60, 70, 80,000 and up. And so cars and trucks and SUVs are really expensive now. Motorcycles are expensive too, but that upfront cost is typically going to be a little bit less, but you're not going to save money in the long run. Reason being, if you have to replace a tire, that's, $300 right there. If you got to pay somebody, it's going to be even more. In a truck, you might get 60 or 70,000 miles depending on the tire. On a motorcycle, within 10,000 miles or so, you definitely want to change at least the back tire. Oil changes. If you buy the oil from Harley, let's say, that's $105. That's assuming that you do it yourself. If you pay somebody, it's going to be more. Now, oil changes are really easy to do on Harley Davidsons, but still, the oil itself is expensive. You might pay $200 for somebody to change the oil in that vehicle, where you can go to any of the 5-minute places, or some of the cheaper places or whatever, Jiffy Lube, and pull in there and say, hey, I want the works synthetic oil and blah blah blah. You might walk out with a $75 bill. A lot of motorcycles require premium gas. Insurance is typically going to be cheaper on a bike. But none of this is including the parts and accessories that you do. I mean, you got, a $2,000 exhaust, or a $1,000 tour pack, $700 seat. This stuff is really expensive. And so if you think you're going to save money in the long run on a motorcycle, you'll get better MPG versus, a car or a truck typically. But at the same time, you're not going to save a ton of money by buying a motorcycle. Another thing you may not understand when you go on a long road trip in a car or a truck, if the GPS says it's going to take 5.5 hours in that car or truck, it may take you 7 hours on a motorcycle, maybe longer. Well, why is this? Well, because on motorcycles, first of all, we have smaller tanks. Now, I have a 6-gallon tank on my Harley, and I can get about 250 miles or driving straight on through, but on a bike it doesn't work like that. And of course, in a car or a truck, pretty much everybody knows how to drive. So if you have your wife with you, she can kind of take over for you if you get tired. On a bike, maybe she has a motorcycle license, or maybe she doesn't. Either way, it's going to be just you doing that trip most likely, and so you got to take breaks, you got to walk around, you got to get gas a little more often, and it's going to take a little bit longer to get to your destination, but it's going to be a much more involved and awesome experience getting to that destination, and that's what it's all about. How about the time it actually takes to get ready on your motorcycle? You may be thinking, well, you swing a leg over and you start it up. Well, that's true, but if you're getting prepped for cold weather, it takes a little bit more time than what you think. In a car, I mean, if you have remote start, perfect. You start it up, boom, heated seats, heated steering wheel, all that stuff is started, you're good to go. On a motorcycle, if you have a carbureted motorcycle, it's going to take even longer in the cold. Most bikes are fuel injected, but either way, putting on your chaps, getting your layers, making sure, you have some kind of bandana or something, a face mask or something pulled down. So, you're trying to block the wind at any angle it can actually get on when you're putting on your gloves or your helmet, trying to get your helmet where, it'll actually go on your head and not pull the bandana over your eyes. So layering up is obviously super important. If you have heated gear, then, plugging everything in, setting your zones, all of these things take more time than what's expected, and so that's something you need to account for. And so if you see motorcyclists and they're kind of doing their thing and they're getting ready, or me specifically, I'm not on time for anything, and that's just me. So if you say, hey man, meet me here at 10 o'clock, 10, 15, you best believe I'm rolling around. And so that's just a personal flaw, but it takes even more time to get prepped on a motorcycle than it does in any car or vehicle. Now, I've talked about weather in previous iterations on this series, but that was more in preparation of the weather and checking it and being prepared with gear and, how to ride and in the weather and all that kind of stuff. But there's another element, especially to rain, and that is when you have any part of your body that's exposed and those rain droplets start to hit you, it literally feels like you're being pelted with a BB gun or an airsoft gun. Yeah, it does not feel great. And so that is a part of it. Bugs can have the same effect. You know all those bug splatters you get on your windshield? Yeah, well, we deal with those as well. And so if they're on your helmet or if you're not wearing a helmet, you're going to obviously feel this a little bit more. But when those suckers, you drive into them going 60 miles an hour, you know it. Or if you have a bunch of trees overhead, when those little acorns drop and, hit you in the leg or hit you on the head or drop inside of your helmet. Bees, if those get inside of your helmet, that's a really bad day. And that's kind of just an unlucky day at that point. But all of these things are, just a minor inconvenience on a car. Maybe you get your paint is chipped or whatever. But on a bike, we feel all of those things. And we're obviously a little bit closer to the nature and all of that kind of stuff whenever we get on our bike. And unfortunately, these things can have an impact on you as a rider. But that's a part of the experience. When I first started riding again back in 2017, I had my very first Harley Davidson, an Iron 883. I had a helmet on, but the rain started coming down so hard and from the front that it literally etched the glasses I used to wear. It etched into the glasses. And so it was insane, dude. I had 2 inches of water in each one of my boots. Obviously, I wasn't prepared back then. Just kind of, doing my thing on a Saturday. And yeah, it was pretty bad. And so those are the things that you remember, though. And that's all a part of the experience. Another thing that we do as bikers that you may not understand is if you see us kind of weaving back and forth in the same lane, but we're just kind of picking one side or the other, this is really crucial to staying upright and, actually having a good line of sight on a motorcycle. First thing we're trying to do is avoid the oil slicks. And so those are typically going to be right in the middle, and they're going to be heaviest, at stoplights or stop signs. Now, those really become a problem, the first 20 minutes of a rainstorm because all of that stuff kind of gets brought up and it is very slick. And so you may not notice this in a car, but on a motorcycle, that first 20 minutes of a rainstorm is a little bit sketchy. After that, typically that stuff washes away. But that's the first thing we're trying to do. We don't want to ride in that, oil slick part of the road. But we also want to pick the best lane for us, not only so the car in front of us can see us in one of their mirrors, but also so we can see up the road. Depending upon the car that we're around, the cars that maybe are beside us, or, obviously we're always kind of looking for that open lane where we can create a buffer zone between us, the cars behind us, and the cars in front of us. But, certain vehicles with, certain widths are worse than others. And so we want to make sure that we pick the best part of the lane where we can see up the road, because we don't want to have to react to things that are, happening super quick. We want to be able to anticipate those things and make adjustments as needed. For instance, you see a piece of cardboard in the road, or worse, you see maybe a basketball in the road, pile of rocks, anything. On a car, you just run over it. You're like, oh, okay, whatever. On a bike, that could put us on the ground. And so we need to be able to see those things. And that's why you will notice that bikers specifically will just kind of change their position inside of the same lane. So not only can we be better seen by cagers, but also so we can see better up the road. The last thing I want to talk about is counter steering. And so, in a car or a truck, you turn the wheel in the direction that you want to go. On a motorcycle, at low speeds, you turn the handlebars in the direction you want to go. But once you get up to, over 20 miles an hour, let's say, that's where you have to counter steer. And the simplest way to think about this, because there's physics involved and a whole lot of stuff that I'm not probably even smart enough to get into, but when you ride a bicycle or a motorcycle, anything with 2 wheels, the concept is still the same. So if I want to go left, I will push left on the handlebars, which in theory is actually pushing the tire to the right, but it causes you to go left. So you push left to go left, you push right to go right. And that is the basics of counter steering. And so even if you can't grasp the concept of it, it's still something you're going to just do, because it's how the motorcycle actually works in turning and leaning into a curve. And so that's how motorcycles actually turn, is by leaning. And so the more you lean, the sharper you're going to make that turn. And so counter steering is really important. It's not only important for making or negotiating curves, but also when you're trying to avoid obstacles. You're going 50 miles an hour in a straight line and something gets in your way, your brain says, look at that thing to avoid it. But through training, counter steering, looking past that thing that you don't want to hit, is actually the correct way to do it. So it kind of all goes back to training and having, to have the skill to ride a motorcycle, or, the skill to be able to control your motorcycle to its fullest potential. And that's 7 more things that only bikers will understand. And so again, no matter if you have never ridden a motorcycle and you have questions about it, or if you're just now getting into it, or you've been doing it for a long time, I'd love to hear your opinions, questions, everything down below. One of the biggest things about motorcycling is it's a brotherhood, man. So a lot of, us, most bikers that I've seen get along just fine. And so they're willing to answer questions and all that kind of stuff. So it's a really great community. If you have any of those, leave them down below. If you want to support what we do, you could subscribe to the channel, or you could join us on Patreon, or join the channel right here and never have to leave YouTube. Big thanks to you guys. See you in the next one. And as always, holding down.